it's almost like you foreshadowed this. I was kind of replaying our conversation in different parts of that, and was like, that was eerie, the fact that we touched on some of these things that then a precipitous event exploded this. And I think it's super important to separate everything and have independent discussions, because of what I think the discussion I'm seeing now is let's just go full Monty on this, defund police, get rid of it. So I think it's really important to segment this conversation and go, first off, that all is an agenda in and of itself. This wasn't where a horrible incident was captured on film and suddenly everybody came up with these ideas within a matter of weeks. These ideas and ideologies have been years in the making and have been simmering quietly by the people that truly believe in them. That is their ultimate end goal agenda, is to have a police-free state. And what that looks like for anybody, they can't give you any articulable answers. When you say, well, how does this look? Well, I don't know. It's just what I want. I want no police to be around. Well, shit. Like, I want that world too. I want the world to be so kind, so generous, and us also be respectful of our fellow man, that there would be no need for policing. In the history of humankind, that has not been achieved. And I think we have a little bit of ways to go for that. So then if you're just talking about, okay, let's have a different model, where a more progressive model where officers are trained at a better standard to handle the things that have now been put on their plate. I'm all for that. That absolutely should happen. How do you do that and cut budgets is beyond me.
100%.
Kind of touched upon it in the last podcast. This is a nationwide discussion, and it's much deeper than that. Having a discussion about policing in California and having a discussion about policing in some small county, and like I'll throw Georgia out there or something like that. I mean, I think even I said last time, I have a friend in Idaho that has been a police officer for a while before having to go to the academy. Those days were over 20 years ago in California. So what California standards are and what other states and other jurisdiction standards are not the same. So I then think you have to then drill down even farther into this conversation and say, okay, so are we talking about bad police officers from a ethical standpoint, as in these people are evil, like Denzel Washington in Training Day? Like, are you talking that style of person versus somebody that is undertrained and did something not out of malice, but out of poor training, no alternatives? And then you look at that and go, okay, if those people are already undertrained, and then you're going to start taking away different avenues available to them, like the carotid hold that everybody labels it a chokehold. It is not a chokehold. It is not meant to restrict the airflow to a person. It's a carotid hold, the same that is done in MMA. And it's a very effective tactic when done properly and under the circumstances that warrant it. You don't just go up to behind a grandma on the street that's like won't sign a ticket and put her in a carotid. Like, when it comes time to apply that, shit is really fucking bad at that point. And it is the effective technique for subduing somebody with little to no harm. And I'm not talking about underlying medical conditions that could be exacerbated by anything. Just an average, healthy, want to fight person, putting a proper carotid on them, they're done. They're out. You can handcuff them and they come back. No harm, no foul. There's not even taser darts in that person that you got to pull out. There's no pepper spray that you got to decon for the next 45 minutes to an hour. I mean, it truly is something that in specific circumstances is a highly effective tool. And then if you take that tool away, now what? You now have a broad gap in the use of force continuum that now you have to escalate to a higher level of force because you took that out because you didn't like one aspect of it. And then...
Can you explain the use of force continuum a little bit? Kind of like what would different levels of use of force and how and when those are applied?
So use of force is a continuum. They used to talk about it in a lot of different terms. It used to be a wheel. It used to be a ladder. They moved away kind of from the ladder concept because it kind of gave people the notion that you had to start at one level of force and walk your way up a ladder to get to a higher level of force, when in reality, you may need to start at this level of force and then you can de-escalate and go down or up or sideways. So I think that wheel was the better description. And then, they're always coming up with some new thing. But in essence, what it is using the appropriate amount of force in that moment to effect an arrest. And that can be from simply verbal control. Turn around, put your hands behind your back. And somebody goes, cool. And they do, all the way up to deadly force. And so when you talk about things like less than lethal force, that's why we call it, we moved away from the term non-lethal force, because all force can be lethal depending on some other extenuating circumstances. So you take a beanbag and you beanbag round out of a shotgun and you shoot it at somebody, but when they first came out, they were flat and they would hook sometimes like a frisbee, and if they're spinning, they could hit somebody in the throat and actually cause them to die. That's an unintended consequence of the force. So it's no longer non-lethal because somebody died as a result of it. So they moved to less lethal. Under most circumstances, this level of force should not produce lethal results. Canine bites, batons, and then all the way, then working back down to lower levels through pepper spray, tasers, and things like that. So it's using the appropriate level of force. And then typically the teaching should be, and then now that this has become politicized, it's going to become more dangerous. You should use the highest level of force necessary and no more than that. However, that doesn't mean that you sit there and roll around with somebody on the ground when one well-placed baton strike that could break their arm ends the fight and you're done. So in my career, I saw the hesitancy creep in, probably unlike any point in history of policing, where people are now worried about the outcomes of the force they're going to use while they're using it. Like, what are the political and legal ramifications? You should always consider the legal ramifications of justified in using this force. And when I go to write the report, this is why I document, this is why I use this force, because of a whole host of factors. It's not just, well, he was standing there and said, fuck you. It was like, he had a fighting stance. He based on his mannerisms, I believe he had a higher level of fight training than an average citizen. Like, there's a difference between a drunk guy pulling away from you and a dude squaring off with you that's like, I'll sock you in the jaw kind of thing, So all of those factors come into play when you make a legal decision to use force. But the hesitancy of using force, and you can watch like countless videos right now on the internet of people, of officers struggling with a suspect to control them and subduing, when if they'd just used a higher level of force, maybe it's just a control hold, maybe an actual really good control hold that the guy's like, fuck, and you're like, yeah, stop fucking around, like, let me put these handcuffs on you, get you in the car, de-escalate this whole thing. So by using a higher level of force instead of like trying to grab them and they're pulling and they're here, and then you have to end up using more force because you didn't just do it right the first time. That's the big deal with force. Is
how much follow-on training did you get after the academy on use of force and like, hey man, this is how, like, fight training or whatever you want to call it, like using that actual like chokehold or using a baton on somebody? How much training is it, or how much is it kind of, hey, we told you about it and you're gonna have to kind of figure it out on the street?
In California, it's ongoing. It's mandated. There's post officers standards and training. It's the state mandate. You're not required to follow them, but in California, should you choose not to follow post guidelines as an agency, you would be taking all the liability on yourself. I personally can't think of an agency that I've ever heard of that does not follow post guidelines. So they mandate the level of training. You have in-service training every year, or my agency did it for like 3 months of the year. The first quarter, you went every other week for training. So there's a certain amount of hours for everything. Domestic violence training, legal updates, critical incident response, dealing with mental health issues, and then firearms, defensive tactics, weaponless defense. And then as time has evolved, I've seen that training change. There was a couple prescribed methods in the academy that were the big ones, of joint manipulations and baton stuff, and then that has evolved into the more progressive agencies doing some ground fighting stuff. So an agency that uses or has the carotid hold as a part of their escalation of force, it has to be in their policy to use it. You can't just go and do it just because you feel like it. So if your agency doesn't authorize you to use the carotid, then if you did it, you would basically be in a fight for your life, and all force is legal if it's like if deadly force is justified and you're choking somebody literally to death, then deadly force is justified. But if your agency doesn't approve the carotid, then that is an unapproved thing that you would be doing, and you can't use it. So if your agency uses the carotid, there is a state mandated amount of training that you have to go through. You have to read the policy. You have to describe it. There's a testing thing every phase. It did it every single year. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, every agency in California has ongoing training, and there's a required amount of that for whatever it is that you're training. There's a required amount of hours and stuff.
That makes sense. I mean, and it's good to hear, really, because, you know,